and welcome back to the Hot Lap. We're looking at the Qatar Grand Prix, but more significantly, yes, we are doing our F1 driver tier list for the 2023 Extra Tire 3-stop. Oh my gosh, it's really hot. Qatar Grand Prix. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. So let's get into it. The Qatar Grand Prix won, incidentally, by a certain Max Verstappen. You may have heard of him. He is a 3-time world champion. But how did all the other drivers do? Well, as we know, Oscar Piastri finished second with Lando Norris third. Let's start at the back though. Carlos Sainz. What was his weekend like? Number 55, Carlos Sainz. Unfortunately, he didn't even start the race, so we can't even look at his fastest laps. However, on the starting grid, good old Carlos Sainz, he qualified a poor 12th, didn't he? But on the sprint, this is where it gets interesting, Carlos Sainz finished 5th. And on the sprint shootout, Carlos Sainz started 5th. And obviously in qualifying, Carlos Sainz started 12th. How was his weekend since he was last? I think it was pretty average, maybe. It wasn't really an A. I'm going for kind of like a low B here. He'll be in the low Bs, I'd imagine. Not too bad. Could have done better. It's difficult to completely rank him though, due to the fact that he didn't start the race. But there we go. So next up, who finished last? Well, it wasn't Carlos Sainz, as we know. It was a certain Sir Lewis Hamilton. Oh, Lewis. He did not have the best weekend, did he? If I'm really honest. I mean, he, as you probably saw in our previous video, he went out on the first lap. He hit his teammate on the first lap, lost that tyre. The tyre the tyre rolled away, which always amuses my mum when she sees the tyres rolling away from people. Safely, of course, not big accidents. But I digress. So, Lewis Hamilton, he obviously finished last in the race. How did he do in qualifying, though? Well, in qualifying, he was out-qualified by George Russell. And had it not been for the two McLarens, he, I think, would have started, about 5th. So, row 3, which wasn't solid, really. And for the sprint shootout, he did even worse. I mean, George Russell, he qualified 4th. Lewis Hamilton qualifying 12th. For the sprint, however, he went up to 5th, which was really good. And then obviously we had the race where, Lewis, you know what, he's gonna have to go into the D's. He's not the worst driver though, because that could have been avoided. And the other thing is, it wasn't like he had an amazing start from 10th trying to take the lead on the first lap. He was 3rd. He did a really good start. There seemed to probably be a miscommunication between him and George. 3 into 1 will not go. I think had Lewis left the tiniest bit of room, I think the shame is that he potentially would have been leading on that first lap, which could have completely transformed the race. And when you looked at George Russell's pace, when he went to the back, coming through, it almost seemed on par, and sometimes maybe a bit better from the naked eye and watching the broadcast than the McLaren team. And at that point, you really have to wonder how they all would have done, how Mercedes would have done. Could they have won the race? Who knows? But they had. I think they had a much better chance of winning the race than, let's say, that they did in Japan. So then you have to wonder, did they throw that away? So next up in our race results is Logan Sargeant. He quit, which I think was quite brave, really, because a lot of the drivers, it's been coming out in the news, were having a lot of trouble during the race with the heat and exhaustion, and he was saying how difficult it was. And when the broadcast, poor, bless his heart, Mr. Sargeant, he just couldn't get out of the car. He just couldn't get out of the car, and he needed help to get out of the car, which was a massive shame. I mean, Logan Sargeant, this is one of his best weekends. He nearly out-qualified Alex Albon. He didn't. He started 15th. Alex Albon started 13th for the main race. For the sprint shootout, Logan Sargeant, he started at the back, and the actual sprint race, he finished pretty much, did that DNF in the end. So a very average day, but he didn't make as many mistakes as some people, which we'll get into in a bit, I'd imagine. But yeah, he's gonna once again though. Logan, he's gonna go in the D tier, I imagine. But one better than Hamilton because we expected better from. I'm going to put him low C, really low C, because yes, he made a mistake. It is Logan Sargent, but we did, to be fair to him, we did see an improvement in the qualifying, didn't we? And it's one of the closest he's been to Alex Albon for quite a while. So Logan Sargent in the C's. Next up, as we're looking at that wonderful race result, is Liam Lawson. Very average, wasn't he? A lap down, finished 17th in qualifying. He didn't qualify very well as well. He's been looking very average all this time. Qualified 18th in the sprint shootout. He ended up qualifying 14th, which was a bit better, but still obviously outgunned and outclassed by his teammate. And in the actual sprint, he ended up 15th and pretty much last of the finishers. So, Liam Lawson, you're going into the... it's difficult, isn't it? You're going to go into the C spot, Liam, because I can't think, the low C. But I do think Logan Sargent had a more impressive weekend than you, considering where he was coming from. And in a way, it's good that we're disappointed, as I keep saying on our other shows, with Liam Lawson, because we know he can be really, really good. We know he can do it. And unfortunately, he just didn't do it in Qatar. So, next up, after Liam Lawson, we have Nico Hulkenberg, who finished 16th. And on the starting grid, not the starting grid, in qualifying, Nico Hulkenberg, he started 15th. It's always exciting when you got the sprint because there's so many results to look at. In the sprint shootout, Nico Hulkenberg, he did start, where did he start as I'm going up and down? He started 7th, which was really, really good qualifying. I mean, fairly solid in terms of that for the sprint shootout. And in the actual sprint, he ended up finishing, I believe it was at the point he DNF'd, didn't he, in that mistake there. But he did a decent qualifying. So I'm going for Nico Hulkenberg, a high C. So there we go, Nico Hulkenberg. Not too bad really, but we have seen better from him. If I want to be really honest, is that a bit harsh? I don't know, but there we go. Now, next up, we have, after Nico Hulkenberg, it is Yuki Tsunoda, who once again had a very average weekend, finishing 15th. To be fair, I don't think the AlphaTauri, it didn't really suit this circuit, but still, he beat his teammate, which I think is the absolute minimum that you really want to do. Now, in qualifying, Yuki Tsunoda qualified 11th, which wasn't too bad at all. If I'm honest, that was fairly good going compared to Lawson's struggles, and I feel that the pressure is obviously on Yuki Tsunoda. In the sprint shootout, he ended up qualifying 18th, which wasn't too great, was it? In the sprint, qualified by Liam Lawson, and in let me get this. In the actual sprint, he ended up a very 11th, so it wasn't one place out of the points. Did he do better than Liam Lawson? I think they kind of had a fairly yes, about the same, very samey weekend. So he's obviously in the C. He's obviously in the C tier. We're not doing too well there. There's no one in the A tier at the moment, which is a shame. And we've got only one B, which is poor old Carlos Sainz. So fingers crossed. Who is up next? We've got Kevin Magnussen, who beat Nico Hulkenberg in 14th, getting quite upset at a couple of times. Not quite understanding what his pit was saying, if I remember. But in qualifying for the main race, Kevin Magnussen was 19th, second to last. I mean, that's a full 4 places behind your teammate, which was a shame. And in that Q1, I mean, Hulkenberg did a 25.9, Kevin Magnussen a 27. So yeah, not that great really, if I'm honest. And so there were so many deleted times as well. Now, when we're looking at sprint qualifying, Once again, Kevin Magnussen second to last, completely beaten by Nico Hulkenberg, who qualified 7th. That Ferrari, at least in qualifying trim, was really, really good, wasn't it? And in the sprint, we've got Kevin Magnussen finishing 13th, but I think a lot of that had to be because of that big crash and people going out. So, Kevin Magnussen, you are going the bottom of the C's, not, nearly a D, but not quite. For good old K-Mag. So, next up, after that disappointing, it's been disappointing for Haas for a while, really, hasn't it? And what's quite exciting about the season, you don't know quite who's going to do really well when you go into a race weekend, other than Red Bull. Because even at the top, we predicted it's going to be McLaren, Ferrari, then Mercedes, and we were very wrong in terms of who had the speed. Now, 13th was the place where Alex Albon finished, but he did lead. He did lead the race for Williams, albeit, I think, for a lap, let's say. So, where did Alex Albon qualify? Well, he nearly got out qualified by Logan Sargent, but he ended up pipping him just out of Q1 and qualified a somewhat average 14th. This circuit, Williams pretty much being quite open about the fact that they weren't going to be too good here. Now, when we look at the sprint shootout, Alex Albon, again, 17th, really, struggling there. Logan Sargent not really doing too much of a representative lap. So, the actual sprint itself, though, Alex Albon finished 7th, which is almost something I forgot about when I look at it. 7th for Alex Albon, some really, really important points. And this is despite starting, 17th. So, Alex Albon, I'm going to give him a B. I'm giving a B just for that, which was what was clearly a very difficult car. And I've got to put you by default almost ahead of Carlos Sainz, because he represented Williams well there, didn't he? Let's be honest. So next up, after Alex Albon, who's going to be our next victim of the tier list? It's going to be Pierre Gasly, he had, once again, he finished 12th, did Gasly. Another average weekend for Alpine in the actual race, because when you look at qualifying, Gasly qualified 7th. He out-qualified Ocon. He did a 1:24.5 and Ocon did a 1:24.7. Now, interestingly, on the sprint shootout, it was Ocon out-qualifying Gasly. Gasly not making it into Q3, but Ocon making it into Q3. And as I mentioned, obviously in qualifying, it ended up being the other way around. Now, in the actual sprint, we had Pierre Gasly 9th, and sadly, Ocon ended up going out. So Pierre Gasly scoring some quite important points. But with Ocon finishing 7th in the race, Pierre Gasly, I think, did a few questionable manoeuvres, let's say, on the track, like pushing George Russell wide and basically going off the track to keep his position. So I think in the end, Pierre Gasly, you should have known better. He did give the position away once, but then he did also receive a 5-second penalty. So I am going to put you behind. Do I put you behind, or I'm going to put you next to Nico Hulkenberg? So a high-ish C, let's say, for Pierre Gasly. Next up, our next victim is, after Mr. Gasly, going to be Lance Stroll, finishing 11th in the race. Okay, Lance, not bad. But then when we go to that qualifying session, he finished 17th on a 1:26.3, and it was Fernando Alonso on a 1:25.2. So 1.1 seconds off your teammate. Now, in the sprint shootout, once again, he finished 16th in what is a car that should be a lot faster. And in the sprint, he finished 15th. But, and here's the big but then he had a rant and ended up pushing one of his helpers. I think he was, like one of his trainers. So, not good. Lance Stroll, you did worse than Lewis Hamilton. And I think people are starting to question, what are you doing in F1? We did have a video, whether he's, good enough for Formula One. And he did, and Lance Stroll did, as I keep saying, he had a much more solid career prior to F1 than a lot of people give him credit for. But no, you don't do that. You are a professional sports person, Lance Stroll, and you don't go doing that. And you were absolutely rinsed by your teammate Fernando Alonso. So no excuses there. At the moment, the worst driver. Race result. Next up, after Lance Stroll, is Sergio Perez. Well, he finished 10th. Yes, he did get a point, despite essentially adding 15 seconds to his race by getting 3 penalties for going wide, despite having the first, let's be honest, fastest car. I mean, George Russell finished 4th. Sergio Perez finished 10th. George Russell at one point was behind Sergio Perez after his accident, let's say, with his racing incident with Lewis Hamilton. And, well, there's no excuses. Sergio, you are going in between. The only reason you are going in between Lewis Hamilton and Lance Stroll not being the worst is because you don't hit your people that you work with. Or push them, assault them, whatever way you want to look at it. And then, Lance Stroll, he was interviewed about it, wasn't he? He mentioned, oh yeah, we're cool now, bro. Not one public apology about his behaviour. That's why you are at the back, Lance Stroll, for today. Prove me wrong, please, for the USA. Do something, and you two do something, and Perez, do something for the USA. Show us 9th. Zhou, one of our stars of the race. Zhou, but what was his whole race weekend like? Well, okay, Zhou, for the race, he ended up finishing 9th. For qualifying, Zhou didn't do as well. He was 20th in the Alfa Romeo. Not particularly very good. For the sprint shootout, Zhou ended up qualifying 15th at qualifying by Valtteri Bottas. But for the sprint, Zhou ended up finishing 14th. So kind of average, really, for Zhou. But going pretty much almost plumb last, 19th, I think, as Perez started in the pit lane, to scoring points for the Alfa Romeo team. He was one of the stars of the race. I think even when we consider the whole weekend, well done, mate. Zhou, you're going straight up there in between Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon. There. You are going into the middle to high Bs, because we were really, really impressed with Zhou. Having said that, looking at the next race results, who is the next victim? It's the person that finished 6th, Fernando Alonso, who did an average job, I want to say. I think that's about the best that the Aston Martin you're going to get out of the Aston Martin. In qualifying, he qualified 4th, which was, really, really solid for the Aston Martin there, and he didn't mess up any of his laps like the McLaren boys. For the sprint shootout, our dear Fernando ended up qualifying 9th. And he didn't end up doing a lap though, did he? He made kind of like a bit of a mistake. And for the actual sprint, Fernando ended up finishing 8th. So kind of like gaining a position. But still, I think Fernando did about as good as he could have done, really, given the circumstances. And he's going up there in the B. Didn't make too many mistakes. He did go off that one time where I kind of felt that he needed a tom-tom almost to find out where he was. But Fernando Alonso, well done. You didn't do too bad. You did not do too bad. Next up is, let's see, Fernando Alonso is going to be Charles Leclerc, who had a very average for Ferrari weekend. We all thought after Japan, they're going to be behind McLaren and in front of Mercedes, especially in that Mercedes battle. But they didn't. So Charles Leclerc finished 5th, 38 seconds behind Verstappen. 4 seconds behind George Russell, but I think George Russell was cruising towards the end once he realised he was not going to catch those McLarens. So Charles Leclerc, he qualified 5th for the actual race. In terms of the sprint shootout, he qualified 6th. He was out-qualified by Carlos Sainz. And in terms of the actual sprint race, Charles Leclerc ended up, for the sprint, finishing 12th, which was really disappointing because he was on the softs. So really, really average. I can't help but think he should have done better. So he's going in the high C's. And this is one where Carlos Sainz appears to have done better than Charles Leclerc, in our opinion. But there we go. So, who is next? Well, after Charles Leclerc, it is George of the Russell. Did a really good qualifying. He out-qualified his teammate. And to be fair, coming into this weekend, the pressure was on him, wasn't it? And he finished fourth in the race, despite that first lap incident, going to the back of the grid and seemingly having like an extra pit stop compared to everyone else. In the qualifying, he qualified second, albeit it would have been, like fourth, but the two McLarens couldn't get a lap in. So, and George Russell didn't make a mistake, so a well-earned P2. Now, for the sprint shootout, he again out-qualified Lewis Hamilton, and he started fourth, which again, really, really solid, for the sprint. George Russell ended up finishing fourth as well. Again, really, really, really solid. A really good weekend, a really good comeback after Japan. You, sir, are our first person in the A slot. Well done, George Russell. Okay, next up, we have essentially the third place finish, Lando Norris, finishing only 5.9 seconds behind Max Verstappen, a second behind Oscar Piastri. He did have the pace in the race. Now for the sprint grid, for qualifying, he ended up starting 10th because he didn't do a lap, essentially. They were basically deleted. So for the sprint shootout, he was again out-qualified by his teammate, second. And he should have really got pole. He went wide, didn't he, at the last corner, thinking this guy could get pole. But both McLarens, and McLaren 1-2 for the sprint shootout. Really exciting. Both out-qualifying Max Verstappen. And for the for the actual sprint, he ended up finishing third. Oscar Piastri finishing first. So he did okay in the end. Obviously, poor old Max getting that bad start, didn't he? And then Oscar Piastri absolutely amazing in that sprint. But for starting P10, and then he was out-qualified by Piastri because of mistakes, essentially, Lando made. But in the race, he was really, really solid. So he's up there in the high Bs. I can't give him an A because of that big faux pas in quali. And you have to wonder. You start to wonder, had it not been for his mistake in the main quali where he qualified 10th, what could have been? Could they have won the race? Maybe. I think a lot of it would have had to do with whether Lewis Hamilton ended up getting that good start and taking the lead. But once again, it's kind of like a race for what could have been. So second in the race was Oscar Piastri, who qualified, I think, 6th in the main qualifying session. He was second on the first lap after that Mercedes hoo-ha because Fernando Alonso checked out as well out of the way. And then, as we know, he got his first sprint pole position and sprint race victory, beating Max Verstappen. So I think just based on that and the fact he's a rookie, I think he's definitely in our first S class because when you look at those circumstances, he got destroyed in the end by Norris in Japan on race pace, and he wasn't as quick as Norris in race pace, to be fair, in the actual race, but he had put his car in a position to be second, and at that point McLaren had told both drivers to hold off. I don't really think they did. I do believe there are doubts, let's say, as to whether they did hold off, but Piastri, what can you say? I think he was the man of the weekend, and that includes our race winner, Max Verstappen, 3 times world champion, Max Verstappen. I've completely forgotten Bottas and Ocon, but we'll get to them in a minute. So, Max Verstappen, you are going into you're going into the A's. Not as good as George Russell, if I'm honest, because I think George Russell had to overcome a lot more than Max did when it came to the race. And Max, in arguably the fastest car, didn't get pole. Was that because the McLarens are faster? It was a McLaren one, so who knows? But he got a bad start in the sprint race, didn't he, as well, which wasn't too great, and lost a few positions there. Nearly lost first place at the start as well. Made it a tiny bit more difficult for himself. But as we know, once he got in front, that pace of the Red Bull, most people were like, well, he's pretty much won it from lap 1, barring any funny business going on. So Max Verstappen there with an A. Fantastic. Winning the championship on a Saturday, which is not exclusive, but first time, I think, and maybe only time, but we'll see. The championship has been won in a sprint race. You can't knock it. He's been so solid, so solid this year. As I keep saying, best car driver combination going. Absolutely fantastic is Max, but not S tier for this race. So we've got two more that I've seemingly forgotten about. Valtteri Bottas, yes, finishing 8th for the Alfa Romeo in the main race, qualifying in the top 10 as well, qualifying 9th. Now on the sprint shootout, Valtteri Bottas was 13th, and for the sprint he ended up finishing 10th in the points as well. So Mr. Bottas, I mean, you've done really impressive. I'm just going to move Zhou ahead of Albon, but I think I'm going to move Bottas for the entire weekend ahead of Zhou, even though Zhou, I think, was more impressive in the race because of where he came from in the main race. But over the weekend, Bottas was your man. Next up is Esteban Ocon. Last but not least, I'm so sorry I forgot about you, Esteban. I will try not to do it again, but finishing 7th in the race, scoring really important points for Alpine in their fight in the Constructors' Championship. In the qualifying, Ocon was out-qualified by his teammate. He qualified 8th. Didn't get as many penalties, I don't think. Well, he did get a penalty, didn't he, in the end? Because when we look at the starting grid, Ocon, no, 8th, but in the sprint, I do think he got a penalty, and which is why he went out. Sorry, I'm talking rubbish. Ignore me. But there we go, Ocon. You're kind of, I think by default, I'm going to go for like a low B because he didn't make too many faux pas compared to Gasly in the race, and at least you were racing clean, which I think is always quite important in my opinion. But there we go. There is our tier list for the Qatar Grand Prix. Let me go through it one more time in all its glory. We've got Piastri in our S tier. Then we've got George Russell and Verstappen in the A tier. Then in the B in order, we've got Lando Norris, Valtteri Bottas, Mr. Zhou, Albon, Alonso, Carlos Sainz, Ocon. In the C tier, where it leads, obviously, Charles Leclerc, kind of average. Next up in the C tier, we have got Nico Hulkenberg, Gasly, Sargent, Tsunoda, Lawson, Kevin Magnussen, and in the D tier, Lewis Hamilton, and then it's Perez, and then Lance Stroll. It's weird in a tier list where you'd probably think Lewis Hamilton's going to get to the bottom. I can't help but feel that it really is Perez and Stroll overall for the when you look at the weekend as a whole for the Qatar Grand Prix. Not good at all. Needs to improve, all of them, and I'm sure they will. Fingers crossed at some point, hopefully. But there we go. That's our tier list for the Qatar Grand Prix. This has been the Hot Lap. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it to the end, you are an F1 champion. Comment below. Let us know if you disagree or you want to rejig it, etc. And I'll speak to you next time. Thank you.